Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. Later in the morning, but good morning nonetheless for those of us on Pacific Standard Time. If you're tuning from elsewhere, hello to you too. Thank you for joining us for this, the very first session for our AI in Management 5-week webinar series. So I'm super excited for a lot of reasons. I think there's a lot of excitement around AI, what it can do. But I've done quite a bit of research. I'm working with it through management cues and integration tools. I'm also teaching university workshops on AI and having a balanced approach to everything that comes with it. And so this webinar series is specific to management because, of course, at Management Cues, we are enthusiastic and passionate about the management experience, and AI is definitely going to change it from what we're seeing and what we're learning. And so what we're seeing at this time is that there's an absence of questions. There's a gap in development and training for managers. And we have to get on that because it's moving so quickly, so that we know where we are going to land as leaders, as managers, and how to guide our workforce. So for those reasons, I'll go ahead and start by sharing who I am. So I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I'm the CEO and founder of Management Cues. And so I'll share a little bit about what we do and how it's linked to AI and kind of the whole concept of future of training, which I like to reference a lot. So Management Cues is unique in the training space for managers and leaders because we have a scientifically proven approach, which means that we can confirm a return on investment in terms of whether managers are learning in training or leaders are growing in training. We also incorporate an emphasis on experience and what managers are actually experiencing as they're learning, which makes us quite unique. And now we're working on integrating even more immersive experiences with a partner of ours that we collaborate with, Starseed Studios, who we do an integration of augmented reality, virtual reality, and AI. We're looking at all of those components for the next level type of training. So that's how we're connected to the AI space. But myself personally, I teach at the university level, and we're looking at everything that's happening in that space. So with that said, how each of these series sessions are going to go is I'm going to start with an overview. I'm going to break it down. We'll leave with some great takeaways that you can think about and apply right away. And then I'll go through some resources that we provide. Again, because we're passionate about managers' role and we're passionate about what they do in the workforce every day in and day out. And then we'll close it out and leave room for any questions. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get started. So AI is not just a tool, it's not just a technology. There's so much more to it. And so in the management space right now, there's something that's happening right this minute. So right this minute, it's reshaping what the role of management is going to look like and what it means to be an effective manager with this technology, because it's taking up a lot of the task-based things that managers do. So then that automatically creates a different type of environment, and that's the direction we're moving in. This shift, however, is less about thinking about this, about being replaced, and more about redefining where you are going to provide value, because that's what's going to change. And so if you're not able to provide value in ways that are separate from where AI provides value, that's where managers are going to have a challenge. That's where you're going to see layoffs. That's where you're going to see gaps in our understanding of what to do when this time comes. And it's definitely moving in that direction. So let's start. Let's start with a clear breakdown of AI specific to the management role in 2026, right? Because there's a lot of debate going on right now, and I think it's important for us to know the facts around what's already here, what it looks like, what it feels like, and what it definitely means to management, right? So those are the things that we want to definitely take a look at. So let's start with decision making, because that's one of the areas where management and how we make decisions around what happens in our environment, that's going to shift. So from being a decision maker to being a decision architect, right? So AI supports a lot of information output, right? And so for the manager, the leader, the person who holds responsibility, the person who holds compliance in place, we need to be aware that AI, as of right now, can already analyze large data sets instantly, faster than we can. It can predict trends, turnover risk, performance dips, customer behavior. It can already do all of that. It can recommend actions, right? So these are things where managers had a very definitive role in the past. That's shifting. So, what does it mean for managers? So, when it comes to decision making, it means you're no longer the only decision maker at play. And you have to be aware of that, right? You are now an interpreter and a validator of AI outputs because AI is giving you a summary, an analysis, an output. But it's up to the manager to be able to distinguish what's valid and to interpret it into their live environment. So that's a slightly different role than we've had in the past in terms of dealing with information and knowledge. So the skill shift is this for the manager when it comes to decision making. You should move from what decision should I make, which is how we've kind of operated in the management space over decades, to thinking of this as, is this the right decision given the context, the risk, and the people impact? Because you have to remember AI lacks context. AI works off of patterns and sequences, right? It doesn't know how to make exceptions. It doesn't know the person next to you. And so your contribution is going to be to take what AI gives you and check for the right things, right? And so this is where training becomes essential in navigating AI and what the workforce is going to look like. So management is becoming more human, not less human, but we have to know where to contribute and why. And that's going to require training of people. So AI can handle scheduling, reporting, data tracking, basic communication drafting. So managers have to lean into and be more effective, better trained in areas of emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, coaching and development, and psychological safety. So if you want to remain relevant in a leadership or management role, this is where you should be spending most of your resource and time, especially in areas that have been called out already, or we've seen massive layoffs in, right? So this is how you prepare to adapt to this new technology. So the paradox that we have to consider here is that the more AI we use, the more human-centered management becomes. And that's the differentiator. But if you don't know how to step into this more human approach, that's where things are going to become muddy. And that's where it's going to become difficult to really identify the value or the contribution that the manager is making. That's why there's debate on whether there are going to be managers in the near future or not. There are, in my opinion, for these reasons, but there are going to be a lot of managers that get lost in some of what we're going to talk about today. So performance management is being rewritten because AI enables real-time performance tracking, not just annual reviews like you've seen those annual review cycles. Performance management is definitely going to change. Behavioral pattern recognition, AI can do that better than we can, better than most can. Continuous feedback systems, right? Everything's about sequences and patterns. And that is something that used to be left up to human interpretation. And to be realistic, not all managers were trained or good at it to begin with, right? So AI has a leg up on that. Here's the implication though. Managers can't rely on a gut feeling anymore. So they have to get better at interpreting and getting an idea of how to validate areas that maybe AI can't. But even though AI has an advantage over some of these areas in terms of how quickly it does it, how much data it can process, you can't blindly trust it because the data that's coming from AI is coming from a black hole. It's coming from a reservoir of good and bad data, unless the AI tool you're using has actually been programmed to filter that out, which most of the AI that we're using does not do that, right? So it comes flawed, and we need to be able to pick out those flaws. So here's the new responsibility. It's balance, and it's balancing specifically the data context and fairness, because that's where AI is extremely weak at, right? Because it doesn't have a lived lens like human beings do. So context is lacking. The concept of fairness is not something that AI handles because it's about sequences and patterns, right? So you want to avoid algorithmic bias, which bias, hallucinations, misinterpretations are all part of the AI environment at this time. So there's also over surveillance that takes place when we use AI, which brings up ethical concerns. So those are the things that managers have to get very knowledgeable at, and they need to practice. And as of right now, I can tell you that with the young professionals that I'm speaking to in my university workshops, with the managers and the questions that they're asking around AI, they're not looking at this with enough depth. They're just looking at AI in terms of the utility, what time it's saving, the layoffs, the concern about job displacement. And so while all of those are obvious things, there are other things happening in the background. So the risk is this. If you've never heard the term automation bias, write that down, because it's incredibly important, because we're starting to see it. I'm seeing it in my students. I'm seeing degrees of regression as I'm working in workshops and training across clients. And there's this over reliance on AI because AI is easy to trust. It sounds confident. It sounds like it's giving you the right answer, and people aren't checking anymore. And that is an opportunity for managers and leaders to step into and really understand what's happening behaviorally. So, one of the biggest dangers right now with AI in the workplace and elsewhere, if you ask me, but we'll focus on management in the workplace, is that there's this automation bias, which means that managers are assuming that AI is always correct because they haven't been trained on how to distinguish when it's correct and when it's not, and when to step in. They stop questioning the outputs because, again, it sounds so confident. It's so easy to get answers. And you might even find yourself doing this where you're asking your phone for an answer, but you're not validating it. You're just moving forward with the response. So this leads to poor hiring decisions. And we've seen several research studies already for when AI is being used for recruitment or HR. There's significant gaps and bias that takes place when you're using it for that purpose. Misinterpreted performance data. If you don't know how to interpret the data and you leave it to AI and you never learn how, you can't tell as a manager or a leader when AI is giving you the wrong information. And that is extremely dangerous. And that is the automation bias that we're already starting to see. So it reinforces this bias at scale. So there's a case study, and you could look this up on Google. Use Google Scholar so you get a scholarly source, but you can look it up on Google. Amazon ran into a major issue with recruitment because they had imported all of their recruitment data into an AI database. And the systemic bias that they had used to make decisions in the past basically left all women out of their hiring practices. So this happened because the bias wasn't validated, it wasn't checked for. And so when they went to use AI, they actually continued the discrimination and bias because nobody stopped to correct it. And so there's several case studies like that, particularly in HR at this time. And it points to a couple of things. It points to the fact that automation bias is alive and well in terms of how we process AI and what we're looking for. And it points to the fact that we may ourselves not be trained enough to check for these things as AI becomes more normal and more used. So let me see here. Okay, hold on. I think I got, let me see here. Give me a second. I have to reshare. I had a technical issue here. Thank you so much. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Okay, and I think we were here at the paradox. Give me a second. Sorry for that. Okay, here we go. Slideshow. Okay, here we go. So hopefully you could see it again. Let me know in chat. Sorry, there was a slight glitch there. Okay, so decision making where managers are most at risk, right? So here's where we're seeing the impact in terms of what we've seen with managers in the workforce. Managers are increasingly using AI for things like hiring recommendations. They're relying on AI for dashboards and following these predictive analytics, right? Turnover risk, engagement scores, things like this. Now, this is a shift, right? Managers are moving from analyzing to accepting outputs from AI. And as we've mentioned, there's gaps in the knowledge, there's gaps in the information received. And so these things, they create a challenge for us. So here's an example, a workplace example of things that we are very familiar with, right? An AI tool flags an employee potentially, right? Because they're going through these massive databases. They flag them as low potential. The manager's behavioral response is to stop investing time in them, give them fewer opportunities, and interpret behavior through that label because we're relying too heavily, right? That's that automation bias we just discussed. So the manager didn't make a bad decision intentionally. They delegated judgment to the system or the AI. So that delegation of judgment, that's where we have to take a special look at, are we making a distinction between the role that we have as managers and the role that AI is going to play in the decision-making process, right? That's kind of the game changer in that equation. So strong managers are going to do this in the near future and should be doing it now, but it's going to take take a little bit of time for managers to catch up with the AI and the shift in mindset. So we have to get comfortable with challenging AI, knowing where the flaws are, knowing what to look for, and where our judgment needs to step in. So the questions that we should be asking is, what is this missing? Who does this disadvantage, right? Is this biased information that I'm getting? Is it accurate? Does it meet the need in front of me? Because AI cannot detect that or context, right? So managers today need new competencies. We have to start building these today because AI is already shifting the workforce. It is already here, right? And we're starting to see the effects of it. So here are some skills gaps that are becoming really clear when it comes to stepping into this in a successful and effective way as managers and leaders. There's some critical AI era management skills that are missing in terms of training and development. And feel free to let me know if you've been trained on any of these in chat. I want to make sure that I'm speaking to the reality that everybody's experiencing, not just what I'm seeing. So data literacy. So not data science, but how to interpret it, systems thinking, ethical decision making when it comes to AI, because there are several things that AI does that are of ethical concern right this minute, right? Misinformation, hallucination, bias, just to name three, right? And they're embedded in how it works. It's how it's kind of been built. So change management, how to change from a non-AI workplace to an AI-oriented workplace that understands how it works and its limitations, not just what it can do and how much time it can save. Cognitive load awareness. AI can actually overwhelm our cognitive load because it's actually creating different stressors that were not present in the workplace before. This actually aligns what you already talked about, right? What we already talked about, which is that management is a discipline, not just a leadership presence. So critical AI era management skills, right? So data literacy, not data science, but how to interpret it, systems thinking, ethical decision making, change management, cognitive load awareness, and how AI can potentially overwhelm and not necessarily simplify. So again, as a reminder, management is a discipline. It's not just authority. There's a lot that we are playing a role of gatekeeper with, and some of that is going to shift and be obsolete, but some of it is going to change into something different. So training is already behind from what we've seen, the research that we've done, the market research, from what I'm experiencing with our clients, and with the professionals that are up and coming that I'm teaching at the professor level. at the university level and higher ed. So most companies have introduced some sort of AI or moving in that direction or are considering it, but have provided zero management specific training on how to use them effectively in some of the areas we've described. So what happens? Tools get underutilized or misused. Managers revert to old habits quickly, and the return on investment on the actual implementation of AI drops because it's not introduced in a very balanced way. So the gap is AI adoption is outpacing the management capability. So when we forget about the human and we get excited about the technology, there's always a gap that we create in the workforce and in business. And so here's the real shift from task management to cognitive management. AI is taking over tasks. Yes, that's true. And that could be very effective. That could be very profitable. That could save us time. Our focus, however, needs to be clear on what we focus on next. So managers now need to manage their degree of attention, decision fatigue, information overload, because we get massive stimulus constantly from AI because it can do so much in such short periods of time, and the team's cognitive capacity, right? There is a degree of burnout that's a little bit different than what it used to be when we introduced AI. And we have to be aware because AI doesn't have limitations in terms of how much it can do. We do. As human beings, we do. Right? The future manager is going to be asking questions like, is my team thinking clearly? Are we overloaded or aligned? And that's something to monitor. That's something that's going to be essential in this process. So here are some key takeaways for today. So AI augments decision making, but does not replace judgment. The human side of management is now a competitive advantage, and blind reliance on AI is a major risk. Management training must evolve or it becomes irrelevant, right? So the old ways of training have to shift a little bit, and what we train on has definitely have to shift because managers are going to be used in a different way. And so is the leadership component. So the role of a manager is shifting from execution to cognition and context because AI can handle a lot of the execution piece. And as I share with my students, I would say that about 80% of what we do in terms of tasks can be absorbed ultimately within the next 5 years by AI pretty easily. Right. So these are things we have to have top of mind as managers and leaders if we want to continue to grow in the right direction. So with that said, I'll leave it at that for this very first one. We'll take deeper dives as we move through the 5-week webinar series. Let me know if you have any questions so far in chat, and then I'll jump into some resources to help you start getting familiar with some of these back end or less talked about topics around AI and management specifically. Okay, so I'll take a look. We are streaming on YouTube. So let me take a look and see if there are any questions there. And then I'll keep an eye on chat if you have any questions, but let me jump into some resources for you. So you'll get a copy of the session recording. So if you missed it or came in a little late, don't worry about it. We'll send it your way so you can take a look at what we covered. You'll get a copy of the webinar deck. And we always have training programs available online, so you can check out our website. We have featured our management planner and management journals that we offer as well to accompany some of these new ways of thinking in the AI space. If you're curious about our scientific studies that we've conducted around our programs, you can access through this link on your deck our neuroscience studies. And of course, if you want a consultation with me anytime, please feel free to schedule it. Those are free. And we also offer membership programs month to month that are incredibly affordable and keep you in the loop as to what's coming in management training. So AI in management, our next webinar, which will be next Wednesday, is going to cover bias, ethics, and compliance in AI systems. And so we're going to cover how to determine whether bias is happening, what ethics you should be considering as a manager when it comes to AI. There's, I would say, some core areas that we need to start looking at right now to be able to make a difference, but also to have awareness and be knowledgeable, and keep those human components in locked in the right place. And then we'll talk about compliance, which jumps into the legal areas. Legislation is moving a lot slower than AI is. I love to share this phrase with my students when I'm doing the university workshops. And what we're seeing in the world is that AI is actually being adopted faster than the internet and electricity was, which is mind blowing, but it's true, right? And so the changes that are going to come fairly quickly if we're not dialing in at a faster pace. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the next one. I hope that you'll join us, and definitely share with other managers. I think that this is something that isn't talked about enough right now. So anyway, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your time. Um, and I'll see you on the next one.